Hello, beautiful human. Welcome back to another episode of Naked Sunday. I am your host, Caleb Nelson, and I have my good friend, Jeff Cochran, on the episode today. Jeff, I've been so hyped for this. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, not a problem, man. I'm excited about it. Anytime you and I get together, it is a good day. It's not just a good conversation. I tell my wife it's a good day because when Caleb and I connect, the rest of my day is better. I'm thinking higher. I'm believing bigger. And usually I'm taking on the challenges in front of me with just a little bit more energy, man. So thank you for who you are, and just love your friendship, love what you're doing, and the way that you're impacting people.
You're trying to get me to blush off the rip. It's working. It's working hard. And you might have taken the words out of my mouth because, you've probably listened to a couple here and there, but I like to start the episode with why I appreciate my guest. I think we need to start telling each other why we love each other more because far be it for me to say, I think that's a great place to start for this, a world peace conversation. Maybe who gets angry when somebody tells you how great you are, how nice you are, how kind you are? And I felt the same way, especially we've been working together on, you've been helping with the book. And that's been such a journey where you ask great questions. And I think that that's such a great sign of a deep thinker, of somebody who thinks chooses to behave with integrity, who's a great listener, somebody who really takes service to another level. So many people I'm listening to respond or react. And you in every single conversation we've had, I feel like, well, you put it back on me to really reflect on what am I thinking about something. And just from the writing process, but aside from that, just the friendship, that's what I value in a friendship, being challenged to look internally and question how I show up in the world. And I find that it forces me and challenges me to rise to a better level. So, to that effect, my friend, thank you for being that to me. And I know you do that with everything else you do. I've been on your podcast recently and you're just awesome. That's all I got to say about that. Thank you for being you, brother. This has been
well, man, I appreciate it. And it's one of those things I try to tell people, curiosity is my superpower. That's all I got. I can be impressive. I can do all those things. That comes naturally to me. But I just was so tired of that lifestyle of being impressive by age 30 because it really doesn't matter, man. I want to be curious. I want to know people. I want to bring out the best in other people because everybody is impressive in their own way. Everybody has something to add to the conversation. We always get better when we can pull that out. So one of the things I try to train leaders even to do is, hey, don't leave a conversation without learning. You have to treat everybody like they're an expert in something. So if you don't know what it is and you're across, the way from someone and you're just, let's be honest, we have some conversations with people sometimes where you're like, man, you were stupid as a stick. I don't know if there's anything that I could learn from this person. They're just so far gone. When we treat it like we're mining for gold, like we're mining for diamonds and precious jewels, there's something in that person I need to learn. No matter how different they are from me, no matter how ridiculous what they're saying may sound, there's something I need to learn. So I really challenge leaders to try to do that. When they're building curiosity as their own superpower, you want to grow your curiosity. Don't leave a conversation until you've learned something from that person. You're searching for something, you're looking for something. But also, man, I found the difference. Most people don't know the difference on the planet today between being loved and being listened to. They cannot tell the difference because we're in a world where everybody has something to say. Bro, everybody's got a message. Everybody wants to be heard. Everybody's desperate for someone to hear their message. And because of that desperation, we don't stop and truly listen. It's what you said. We listen to respond rather than understand. So when someone comes along that truly wants to understand you, call back what you just said, ask a few clarifying questions, that you're going to feel loved. So if you want to know, hey, how do I love my spouse better? Or how do I love, a sibling better? Or how do I love a friend better? How do I love this coworker that's a struggle better? Start listening just a little bit more because most people can't tell the difference and they will feel loved by you in that way. And I think the more we listen, the more we really start to love people. So for me, man, curiosity and listening, they're the best two superpowers that I can bring to the table. And then you make it easy because every time we're talking, it's a constant back and forth. There's so much there, so much free flow of thought. So I'm excited to be on today, excited to see where this goes. But if nothing else, I think that's worth the podcast right there. Like if you want to love somebody well, just listen, because in a world where everybody's got a message and everybody's got something to say, it's the person who has something to hear that actually stands out as a hero.
Mic drop. We can stop hitting record. Sorry, guys, we're done. I know. Beautifully said. I want to. I think this will get us to this path where you talked about there briefly about when you hit 30, you got tired of trying to quote unquote be impressive. Let's do this before we get there. You know yourself better than I'll. How about you share with the audience, Jeff? Who are you?
Oh gosh, man, that's a hard question even for me to answer at this point. I'm all over the place, and you know that. So many people, when you ask them the question, "Who are you?" they give you a list of what they do, because what you do is a part of who you are. It's a part of your story. But for me, it's just a hard question to answer, because the expectation is, oh, well, Jeff's going to tell us what he does, and what I do is not who I am, like at all. So I mean, who I am, I'm a dad. That's kind of my first responsibility, my first title, and it really is a big part of my identity. I'm a dad and a husband first, and it doesn't matter what I do, as long as I'm a good dad and a good husband, then I'm winning. I feel like I'm winning at life, because I love my two kids, Malachi and Emery, two boys. My wife, Candace, she is literally the apple of my eye. So, I'm a husband, I'm a dad. That's who I am. And for me, a big part of my identity is I'm a Jesus follower. I don't like to say Christian. We talked about this when you were on my podcast. I don't like to put labels on it, Christian, denomination, anything anymore. I was a pastor for a long time, still am an ordained pastor, don't work in the church day to day. But for 2 decades, I worked in the church day to day. But I don't want to be known as what kind of church I go to or as a pastor or anything else. I do want to be known as a Jesus follower that looks different than what most people think of when they think Christian. Faith has become so politicized and everything else. I want to be someone who just loves well, who treats people kindly, who exhibits, what scripture talks about as the fruit of the Spirit. I want to be a person who is full of peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, right? That's who I want to be. So everywhere I go in the world, I just want to be a guy who first of all started as a good husband and a good dad, because nothing else matters if I don't do that. And then outside of that, because my family is really my identity, that's who I am, pouring into them and leading them. Outside of that, I want to take that fruit of the Spirit everywhere I go. And I just want to make the world a better place everywhere I go. So how I do that is probably what most people are expecting when you ask a question like that. I own a couple of different businesses. So I operate a coaching and consulting firm for business leaders. I also own and operate a media company where we help people to produce social media, produce podcasts, really communicate any sort of message. So, we work on anything from books to podcasts, social media, anything in between. If it's an important message for you to communicate, that's part of what we do. We help you communicate it in a way that gets remembered and gets results. Because again, most of what people say, we live in a world where there's so many people have so much to say, very few things get remembered, and very few messages actually get results. So how can we communicate in a way where we make the person on the other end of the communication the hero, where it's not about us and what we got to say? So that's another one of the businesses. And then I run a nonprofit that is just brand new, that we're just getting started, finishing out the 501c3 paperwork, but it's called the Spiritual Abuse Institute. And from my time in churches or around churches, there's just a lot of gnarly stuff that goes on. Within religious organizations, there's a lot of people who've experienced religious trauma and spiritual abuse. That's not Jesus. That's not most people who are in these religious circles, but it happens too often. So the Spiritual Abuse Institute, SAI, what we're doing is we're trying to help people to heal from religious trauma. We're trying to help people move on from any sort of spiritually abusive situation, so that they can re-engage with faith in a healthy way. But we're also trying to end the practices and behaviors and systems that lead to spiritual abuse and religious trauma, because they're really easy to stop when you know what you're looking for, when you know what kind of accountability is needed. So we're on a mission to make it really hard to be a spiritually abusive church or church leader in the coming decades. We want to make it difficult, and it may sound a little too aggressive, but we want to get it to the point to where it's like, hey, if you're doing that crap, we're going to shine a really bright light on you really, really publicly. So much so that it's so uncomfortable that you want to stop doing it, right? But we're also trying to provide resources to churches that want to do it the right way, church leaders that want to do it the right way. So from business consulting to communication company to the Spiritual Abuse Institute. And then the podcast that goes along with that is the Church Disrupted podcast. My hands are in a lot of different things. Those are the biggest ones. There's more. But like I said, regardless of which hat I have on in the day, on any given day or any given week, it's all about just, I want to make the world a little bit better of a place because of the energy that I put into it, because of the fruit that I put into it, the behavior that I put into it. So that's kind of my goal, man. And I want most people to like me, Caleb. Like, I think you know that. I want most people to like me when we're done, but I'm at the point in my life where I'm okay if our values are totally unaligned and you hate me because of that. That's okay, because my values are driving me, not my desire to be liked by people. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at.
I love the response. I love it. And I love that you wound up with, this is what most people are expecting me to respond with. Let's start here. And very on brand. I was like, here we go. Like, could not have lined up a better response from you. What I really appreciated when we do start to wrap our identity up into family, but I think so many people, we've lost touch with the value of the nuclear family. I think people don't understand that is your first, it's almost like your first church. It's your first school. It's your first place where all of these values and practices and lifestyle integration stuff, like that stuff, the fruit you were speaking of, that's where it's instilled first. And so many people in today's age want to offload that responsibility of being a good parent, but let alone that, but like somehow not knowing how to develop a meaningful relationship with their spouse. Where does that go? If you can't have that deeper connection, if you can't be true and authentic, which I think will lead into that impressive concept, where like none of those other sayings, people are go off trying to build these empires with a very weak foundation. The foundation is the home. What you're doing with your significant other and your kids. I think when I saw a chart yesterday on social media, so of course everybody chill out. Like, I know it's social media, but there was some chart about ROI, return on your investment. Just one, like, stocks and this and that. The highest one right at the end was choosing a good partner to go through life with. And it was the biggest return. Like, no shit. Because that person is going to hold space for you. They're going to help you weather the storms. They're going to hold up the mirror when you got to go live up to your potential. But that person in many ways makes you feel safe enough to become the greatest person within yourself. So the fact that the thing that you put the most emphasis on, it doesn't surprise me, obviously, as knowing you, but I think it's so important that people hear that. It's dismissed. Relationships get thrown by the wayside so easily. They become this disposable thing, not realizing it's usually in the juice of digging deeper early, not just when you feel like the wheels are coming off, early, and investing in that and growing that and deepening that will lead to that external prosperity, whether it's first in having children, but I fully believe it also comes with the financial prosperity and the element of legacy. So I thought that was really, really incredible. Could you take me to that like impressive moment when you said when you're 30, you're like, I'm done with this. And what I heard in there was like inauthentic to authentic. That was just like the background in my mind. What led to that moment and then what changed? What was the change in through the trajectory there? I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, no, well, it's never as cut and dry as I would like it to be, for the sake of story. It could be so much more cut and dry, but it really started when I turned 30 because I started asking a lot of legacy questions, right? When I turned 30, the men in my family have not traditionally, they've not lived a super long time, right? So I knew between 30 and 35, I'm going to be middle-aged. So I started thinking about legacy questions at 30. So that was part of it. I think that's what kicked it off. Also at 30, right after I turned 30, I accepted, a new job. So I was a student pastor at the time, a student pastor at a church of about 250 people. We had a student ministry of anywhere from 75 to 100 students, at any given time. So we were pulling tons of students from the community, way bigger than we should have been, for the type of church that we were at. Loved the church, loved the ministry, but I got an opportunity to go to a top 100 kind of church in the country. So, like, if you think about any industry, if you get an opportunity to go to one of the best at what you do, you're going to be excited about it. So, um, got that interview for that job, got to come back to the place that I think of as home in Knoxville, Tennessee, while I'm asking these legacy questions. So while I'm asking these legacy questions, I get to this place I want to be. And Caleb, I immediately was terrified. Like, the moment that I got the job, I think I celebrated, called my wife and celebrated for about 30 minutes. And then terror set in long before I ever moved. And the terror was, how long is it going to take them to figure out I don't know as much as they think I know? Right. Because again, I know I can come across as really impressive. I can win any interview if I need to. But the thought was, if they're doing this at this high of a level, right, then obviously I've got to be a fraud. So I've got to prove that I'm not a fraud, because they're going to find out I'm a fraud if I don't prove that I'm not a fraud. Now, once I got there a few years later, I realized, hey, actually, I'm not a fraud. I really belong here. Right. But it took me a while to figure that out. So I started that journey thinking about legacy and trying harder than I'd ever been in my life to be impressive. Right. And the more I tried to be impressive, actually, the less those relationships were going the way I wanted them to go. So I had relationships with coworkers and stuff, coworkers I just couldn't connect with the way I wanted to. And it's because nobody wants to connect with an impressive person. Okay. Because people are scared of impressive people. So the better I looked, the less I was connecting with people, the people that I wanted to connect with. So, I was good with the people that I was pastoring, but I'm talking side by side peer relationships. I was really hurting those relationships because I was trying so hard to be impressive, and it just didn't matter. Right. So asking these legacy questions, going through that for a couple of years, kind of coming to this place where it's like, okay, well, I belong, but why do I feel the need to prove myself everywhere that I go? And it started, it started a whole different set of questions that, long story short, wound me up in therapy. I ended up in therapy, going to a therapist. My wife is a therapist, and she had recommended it for a really long time. Had a bunch of stuff going on in my family, during this season as well. So I went to therapy, and I literally told the therapist this. I said, I'm here because they always ask you the question, why are you here? Right? That matters so much when you're in therapy. Well, my answer to the why are you here question is, hey, I know I've got another gear in me as a leader, as a dad, as a husband, this is a person, and I can't figure out how to unlock it. And I think there's probably some trauma I haven't dealt with my family. Right. So, this is all positive. This is all, all maintenance stuff. I just need you to help me unlock that gear and figure out what that is. 30 minutes later, after talking about some family stuff, I was in shambles. Just sitting there crying on the couch, but I'd made a commitment to go to this person for 12 months. Right. And he challenged me, he said, you're going to want to not come back, and you cannot show up. And all you've done, he knew how to push my buttons because my church was paying for it at the time. And he said, you can not show up, and that'll be totally fine as long as you're okay with wasting your church's money. But since they paid for it, if you want to come 12 months and see what happens, I think we could really make some headway. So I didn't like where we went in session 1. And he told me, he said, here's why you don't like that, Jeff. He said, what you're experiencing right now is flooding. He said, the moment that we started talking about deep family stuff, the moment that we started talking about stuff in your background, we started talking about you as a child. He said, you just felt like you're losing control. So you want to get out of the room. You don't want to show any emotions, because your fear is that if you show any emotions, you're going to lose control. And honestly, he's the first guy that's ever pegged that with me, because I just didn't show a lot of emotions. And if I felt like I was going to, I'd get out of the situation. But he said, you have been running from the flooding of emotions for so long that you're actually controlled by your need to not feel emotions, because you think it's the opposite of impressive. You think people are going to judge you if you show your emotions. He said, honestly, they probably would right now, because you'll fall apart. But his challenge to me was really, hey, if you'll let me, I want to teach you how to slowly turn on this spigot in a controlled, safe environment. Let's get rid of the flooding so that you can turn it on and off when you're in real everyday environments and be fully you, because you're not showing up as fully you. Right. So pair that conversation, Caleb, with the conversation that I had probably 3 months after I got hired at that church. So go back a couple of years. I had to meet with an organizational psychologist and do some assessments to get hired. And then once they hired me, my boss and I actually sat down with this organizational psychologist to talk about my results. And dude, she was singing my praises, right? So as somebody who came in thinking I've got to impress, how long is it going to be before they figure out I'm a fraud? This woman is saying literally anything you put your mind to do in life, you can do. Like you can have any position at this church, you can do anything else. She said, you are going to succeed because you're one of, and I still remember, like I wrote this down because I was just like, how did I trick this woman so much? Right. She said, you are one of the rare leaders, Jeff, who you're never going to fail at anything, not long term. Like you can lead people in a way that most people can't. And she said, it's honestly a scary type of leadership for a lot of people. And I realized later on that she was actually talking to my boss and trying to prep him for the challenges that was going to come with leading someone like me. But we got to the end of the conversation with her, and she said something that haunted me for a couple of years and led into that conversation with this therapist. So she spends 30 minutes singing my praises, talking about how great I am. There's nothing I can do that's really going to fail. And then she says, at the end of the day, no matter what you do, you will make it to the top of the mountain and you will plant that flag and you will have success. She said, but when you plant that flag of success, if you don't change what you're doing and if you don't change how you're operating, you're going to look behind you and all you're going to see is a line of dead bodies going all the way down the mountain. The people that you stepped over, the people that you used, the people that you abused because you are win at all cost. And she asked this question that again, man, it's haunted me for so long. She said, is it really success if you had to hurt that many people and use that many people to get there? So man, that was a game changer for me, led into this other conversation. So basically I go for 12 months with this therapist, and he teaches me how to turn on my emotions, man. He teaches me how to be fully me. Long story short, I ended up getting diagnosed with PTSD from just the war zone I grew up in, as a kid. Had it all my life and didn't know. So the way that I responded with trying to be impressive was literally just a defense mechanism. It was, in my house, if you were perfect, then people would smile. And if you weren't perfect, you were in trouble. And if you were far off perfect, man, all hell was breaking loose. So whatever the expectation was, I got to find perfection. And if I'm good enough, I can get out of here unscathed. So, man, I was still operating as a 7-year-old kid, as a 7-year-old boy. That's how I was showing up to work. That's how I was showing up in my relationships. That's how I was showing up as a dad. I was showing up that if I'm perfect, I won't get beat. And if not, man, I don't know what's going to happen. This is going to be scary. So when I turned that fear off, when I was able to turn that fear off and just say, hey, those are triggers from my experience as a 7-year-old. I don't have to take those into life now. The moment that I made that realization, the desire to be impressive just kind of went by the wayside because it's a dysfunctional response, right? Yes, I can be impressive, but who am I worried about? Why do I care what so many strangers think? Why do I care about the people who aren't close to me and what they think? And if I just love people well, won't I be impressive to the ones that matter? I think I will. And if that's not impressive, then you're probably not a person whose opinion matters. Your opinion is valid, but it doesn't matter to me because it's not consistent with my values. So, yeah, man, once I realized, because it was just such a challenge to my ego, I'm out here running around trying to be impressive, trying to impress everybody with how good of a leader I am. And all that is a scared 7-year-old kid who still doesn't know how to show up and just doesn't want to get in trouble. So I don't know if you heard that.
I heard it.
Yeah, my bad.
Yeah, that was good. You had me locked in there. I think one of the big takeaways in all of that I hope people grab from it is the power of connecting to emotions. Because I think, like, I hear a difference in the softness and the empathy, and it leads right back to everything you just said before. You with listening, when somebody feels loved because you're capable of holding space and hearing them, that does leave an impression, and it is more impressive that you allowed them to share, to be themselves, to step into their own genius. And they will credit you for being the person that held the space, but you have to be willing to not make it about you for that to happen. And I think, at least what I've learned in some of my own reflective experiences, is that when you can become more comfortable with your own vulnerability and your own emotions and knowing how to wield that safely, because it can be chaotic if you don't know how to, there's time and place for everything. You don't need to be bawling when there's an emergency. You need to kind of keep yourself together and get something going. But if you never also grieve, if you never also show any emotion, you look like a robot, and that's a whole different type of problem. We're not robots. We're human beings. So I think that evolution sounds like that. There's that depth behind that. When I wrote your book, I know you talked about the four engines of impact. Is that the?
Yep.
Am I remembering it correctly? Did
That's
you
right.
come to that after this transformative experience through this 12 months? How did that come about? Was that part of that process where you're like, oh, wow, I'm unraveling some of these things?
Yeah. So my curiosity kicked into high gear when I had that kind of revelation of, trying to be impressive is my 7-year-old immature response. And sadly, we live in an immature enough world where people are buying it and they're eating it up. Right. So once I moved past that, it was just, hey, I want to get curious. I want to learn everything that I can. I want to be great with people. I want to move from being great in people's eyes to being great with people. Right. So just started asking a lot of questions. For me, I'm a big reverse engineer kind of guy. I want to know why something works when it's working, why it doesn't work when it doesn't. I've never found anything worth doing in life that doesn't have patterns to it. So I want to find the patterns because, again, I want to work smarter, not harder. So I started looking at beyond church. I started looking at churches, then beyond church to different businesses, different types of churches. I was operating, with another company as a consultant at the time, kind of learning how that worked. And really through that process, learning through consulting, they brought me on because they said, hey, we think you'd be really good at this because you ask great questions. And that was when I realized all consulting is, hey, can I reverse engineer your problem and the solution and the sustainable solution? And if I can do that quickly enough, then you're going to pay me to do that because there's no point as a business in staying stuck for 18 months and potentially losing your business or losing employees when you could remedy the problem in 2, right? So it was curiosity that unlocked all that for me. And what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to define the patterns that already exist. What's the difference between good and great? Why do some people succeed? Why does other people not? Why did this company succeed here and then not succeed here? And then once I find those patterns, I just want to test them. Do they work everywhere? And if they don't work everywhere, why? Where do they diverge? And my goal with anything that I'm doing is to find patterns that work, that they kind of transcend time and space. They transcend what industry that you're in, and that we can say, at least for this season, this is a pattern that works. It's a pattern that's going to either cause problems or solve problems, because the quicker we can solve problems, the greater things we can do, right? It's the struggle for most people, but it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a person or a business leader. The struggle for most of us is that it takes us way too long to solve a problem. Actually, beyond that, it takes us too long to diagnose a problem. Then once we diagnose the problem, it takes us too long to solve it. So the 4 engines of impact was just looking at churches, looking at nonprofits, looking at for-profits, looking at large business, small business, medium-sized business, and saying, hey, every problem that I see and every problem that I can look back on from the last decade, every problem that we're forecasting, they all come down to one of these same issues, these kind of 4 major engines. And then within each of those, there's kind of a breakdown and, an explosion of the different things that, that come there. But if we know where to look, so I just started testing it out. If you have a problem and you know where to look, saying it's going to be in one of these 4 main areas, then it's usually really easy to find the culprit. Okay. Maybe it's in 2 areas. Once I find what area it is, well, then I can start looking in the detailed parts of that area where this problem that I've identified is most likely to reside. And if I can go down and fix it at the root, then we can turn what would be a 30-month problem into a 3-month problem, right? And if we fix it the right way, this problem's not going to come back up, because how many times have you face a problem in business, and then it comes right back up again and again and again, and it looks slightly different. Well, the reason is because we're actually fixing the symptom, right? We're not fixing the root cause. So the four engines of impact is kind of like we use the illustration of a jumbo jet, but it's basically a triage. If you got four engines keeping you up in the air and one of them starts failing, you got to triage that thing fast, because your only option is to get back flying, to crash, or to glide to a stop, and then you can't get back up in the air. So we want to keep businesses in the air for as long as we can. We want to keep healthy churches in the air for as long as we can. So I'm really with that looking at, next level leadership, my other book, looking at, there's all kinds of stuff I hadn't written a book about, but all of our tools are basically helping to find patterns within patterns. So the four engines of impact, that's the pattern I look for. And then every other tool is to find patterns within those patterns so that we can quickly solve problems and get people up and running, flying, getting to their final destination, the place that they were heading in the first place.
Oh, there's some good things to unpack in that. I think the first thing I want to bring out is the word sustainable. Not sustainable is probably the most unsexy thing to sell often, because I hear it one and the same. I think of it as preventative health. I hear it as the same thing. It's a little slower sometimes. At least it feels that way in the beginning, but the robustness of the system allows you to go farther and longer. And as you talk about impact is a lot about compounding interest. You stay alive another 10 years doing the same thing with the same quality of control, the quality of delivery, chances are your impact's going to expand pretty well. So I thought that was really important that you even said it that way. The other thing that I was thinking about there, and I'm using a lot of analogs with health right now and just in my head. I think maybe I've shared this with you, and I think it's worthwhile with everybody else to hear it. I mentioned on the podcast as well. My buddy had said, hey, the Purebred, my last gym, was more like any church, like what it was supposed to be than any other church you've ever been in. Well, the idea is about sustainable health. We'll figure, sustainable relationships and look like, we talk about leadership. We talk about relationship to yourself, relationship to your family. Like, all those things integrate. And I thought what you were saying there is so important. People don't think about these different elements that come into play. So many people, we'll use the health field real quick, want the Band-Aid fix, the symptom management. Once you said that, I was like, oh, that's fire. They're just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. And of course the problem's going to come back because they didn't want to address the real thing. Like, I got a blister on my heel. I put a Band-Aid over it, whatever, it's covered up for a little bit. Well, you didn't pay attention to taking the pebble out of your shoes. Every time you go running, you're just carving a new blister into your shoe. What if you took 5 more seconds, or however, we're using the metaphor, a little bit longer to just look at the environment that your foot was in? It's not the blister that's the problem. The blister is telling you there's a problem underneath that, and you have to look at the environment through which exists. That seems to be a problem for a lot of people. So
with businesses, Caleb, it's not even the Band-Aid fix. With businesses, a lot of times it's the quick results fix, and the results are real, dude. They are real, and investors are going to eat it up. So especially if you're in like that startup phase and everything's coming from investors, we need to show quick results. We need to show these insane, results so we can get more money coming in, but they're not sustainable, right? You actually know that you're getting these quick results. There's going to be a huge bounce back, right? Which is going to get you in trouble. But as long as you can find another quick fix, you're going to be okay. And that's what a lot of businesses are doing, especially big business with like their shareholders and stuff. So I think about what you do, and I think about, the kind of the health industry, and man, I'm the world's worst at this. Like, again, going back to that idea of being impressive people can find quick results that don't last, and we will applaud them, and we will, talk about how great they are. Do you know how many times I've lost 50 to 75 pounds in less than 6 months? Like, I can't count it on these two hands. Like, I can do it whenever I want to. Like right now, man, I'm sitting at, right around 250 pounds today. I can be under 200 pounds. Let me see, what's 6 months from now? I can be under 200 pounds by the fall. If I want to be by the end of the summer, it's not hard. It's not going to last, because being under 200 pounds is not actually a healthy place for me to be with my body. right? So I know it's not going to last. I know it's not going to fit my lifestyle. I know it's not going to be at a place where I even feel my best and my healthiest, but I can do it. And that's impressive, right? So, if I'm really wanting to impress somebody, then I'd bloat and I'd put on some weight. I mean, I could jump to 275 in a heartbeat, right? Probably by the end of next week, I could be at 275. My body is super weird like that. I know exactly what to do. I could pack on that weight real quick, and then I could drop down and make it look even better. Oh my gosh, 75 pounds. Look at that. And here's our forecast. If we keep going at this level, I'll be 15 pounds, and however long, right? That sounds stupid when you're talking about weight loss, but it's what we do in business. We have these unreal quick results that they are real. We know they're not sustainable, and we give forecasts to go a place where we know they're not going to go. Then we had that hiccup where they kind of slingshot back, but then we know we can go for another quick fix. And what businesses do is it's just this constant back and forth. It's this up and down kind of thing that is playing with other people's money and really doesn't matter. Just like, there's tons of companies right now, let's be real, who are showing record earnings for their shareholders. But it's because in the fear coming out of the pandemic and everything else and all these economic fears, they kept raising prices out of fear. And then the economy never went exactly the way they thought it was going to go, but people were still paying the prices. So they kept raising prices and kept raising prices. When you actually look at the data, a lot of inflation, not all of inflation, but too much of inflation, are companies raising prices to see how much they can get by with. That is not a long-term result because consumers are already starting to say, hey, no, you've raised this price too much. I'm looking for other options. Well, even with the price raised, as margins compress, they can't do that again, which means, they've had these record earnings, but they're not going to last. And actually, if something doesn't change significantly, they're headed for the next 2 to 3 years, record low earnings because those margins are going to compress and no one's going to be able to pay any more because consumers are saying no.
Well, I think this is where we can also bring in what I think is even more important, spiritual leadership. I believe entrepreneurs, let's call it that, CEOs, like in many ways, people really look at it. They're the spiritual leader of their organization, whether they want to say it or not. It's there. You're pitching a vision and we're going to go there and everybody's going to win. Let's call it that kind of thing. In that example you just illuminated, all I hear is that they're chasing an external reward or whatever that is, and being with, and sometimes you got to raise rates. I'm not saying that that's not, and profit's okay. You should make money because you have to eat and you have to fund things, and that's okay. That's not what we're saying. It's, are you doing it at the cost of demolishing the relationship with the client or the family or the follower, the people that come to your church? I think that's really what interests me the most in a lot of this, is that the value structure and the soul of the entity, we could call that in health too, the soul of the gym, we could soul of business, the soul of the human, the soul of the church, is being cast aside to more or less worship a false idol. Your camera just kicked there. There you come back there. Where is he?
I'll get it back.
Where'd you go? I miss you. That to me is the real travesty in all of that. And you see it online. It's like people think it's a marketing and a sales problem, or maybe it's a retention problem, which is really, are you taking care of the people in your stead? Not just the clients. What about your staff? What about, but especially staff, like when you become the leader and you're expecting your staff to care for the client, say it's client first. Well, your staff is your client. The retention of that, it's nowadays, and I've talked to plenty of people about like staff turnover and how can you not keep people, because they're just selling, to me, a very shallow vision. They've lost the soul. They've lost the purpose. They don't have the vision of the company. They don't have a strong mission. They're selling on, oh, this is how much you'll make, and this and that. And those are important to know. but this is also the deeper purpose of what we're doing here together. And here are the core values that we make decisions by, not just this investor is making us worship the mighty dollar. That to me is a very fragile relationship. That was kind of what I was hearing in there. I'd love to just get your take on anywhere that went, because I see really a conversation here, and I really see a conversation about why it's so important what you've been doing with your other work with church hurt and that realm, because it puts spirituality, it puts a faith connection at the forefront, the soul of it at the forefront, which I think, I believe this is that we're in a spiritual health crisis. We've lost that sense of that. That's been thrown away. No wonder people feel so hollow. No wonder people feel like they're so lost, because it's been that power's been given to some other entity that's not really truth. It's just the flavor of the day.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's so much that's there, man. Like, when you think about, we think about companies so different than we think about spiritual entities, churches, nonprofits, whatever. They're really not as different as we like to make them out to be, though, right? Because at the end of the day, what does a good business do? A good business serves their customer well. Everybody's not your customer, but whoever your customer is, whoever your target audience is, you win long-term in business by serving them well, right? So you create value for them. So why has Apple been kind of on top of the tech industry for so long? Well, from the moment they came out with the iPhone, they've served the consumer in a way that nobody else has, right? They've added a ton of value to my life, a ton of value to your life. Honestly, what has been the biggest point of them slipping, over the last couple of years? People look at it and say, well, Steve Jobs died. Well, it wasn't just that they're not being led by Steve Jobs anymore. It's that Steve Jobs' focus on the consumer has slipped, right? So the more they slip on serving the consumer, right, adding value to the consumer, the less market share they're probably going to have unless they get that focus back. So what is a church supposed to be about? And it's the same kind of thing. I'm going to go ahead. I'm having a camera issue, so I'm going to switch cameras just so I can see you. There we go.
Ooh, there we
Pivot
go.
right there. All right. I'm gonna just bring this right here. I'm gonna bring you guys in close. But no, man, I mean, a big part of this is what is a church supposed to be? A church is supposed to be serving people in the name of Jesus. That's what a church is supposed to be, right? What did Jesus teach? He said, the greatest among you will need to become last, and the first will become the greatest. So when a church loses this idea of we exist to serve people even at our own detriment, right? When a church leader says, I exist to serve the sheep even at my own detriment, when we lose that, now we've got a massive, massive problem, right? So when I think about, like, we're talking about businesses and we said, hey, there's nothing wrong with raising your rates. So as a business consultant, I tell people all the time, hey, you need to raise your rates, because a lot of businesses, they never raise their rates because small businesses stay small because they want to serve the consumer so much that they actually don't make the decisions to serve them well. If I don't raise my rate, I don't have enough margin, I don't have enough income to continue adding value to you, right? So one of the questions that I would ask when we come back to the business focus, how do we make this practical? So this is really hyper philosophical. There's people who are listening and they're going, well, Jeff, I get all that and that sounds good, but I'm running a business, and if all I'm thinking about is, hey, how do I serve a person or this, that, or the other? Man, I'm not going to make it. Yes, you will. It gets very practical. Should I raise my rates or not? Here's how you can tell. You raise your rates when one of two things happens. And if those two things are happening, you can raise your rates and not feel bad about it at all. You don't need to apologize. One, the cost of the service or making the goods goes up. Okay. Because if I'm adding value, Caleb, if I'm adding value to your life and it costs me more to make this, so either I don't make it as well, or I raise the rate so I can keep giving you the value that you become accustomed to and you deserved, you're going to get that. And you're going to go, oh, okay, what's going to cost me 5% more because it makes sense. I'm looking around the world, it's costing him 5% more. Be transparent. And if I sent you an email with all of my clients and said that, hey, starting next month, our rates are going to increase by 5%. We really hate to do this, but to continue giving you the service that you become accustomed to with everything else going up, we're going to have to do this. And as always, we'll keep an eye on it. If that ever goes down, we'll change back, because again, as a business, you have margins you're looking for. What is the margin on this product or service? Okay. If I can do it more efficiently and keep the same margin, that's different than just I'm trying to raise rates to grab margin. But the other thing beyond, does this cost more? Am I adding more value? If I'm adding more value, I can raise my rates, and I should raise my rates. Hey, we're going to raise our rates by 5 to 10%. Here's the reason why: we're completely overhauling the service. And you're going to get everything that you have gotten, but you're going to get 25% more. So for a 10% higher rate, you're going to get 25% more. We cannot wait to bring this to you. If for any reason you can't afford that new rate, hey, let us know. We may have a way to grandfather you in on the old plan, but you won't get the new stuff, right? That's an example of adding value. So if the cost has went up for me to keep adding the same value to you, to keep caring for my customer well, then I raise my rates. If the value I'm adding has went up, okay, and people see that, raising my rates is not an issue. But if it's not value, cost, or a little bit of both, then I have no business raising my rates. So what do we do? A lot of times, big business raises their rates off of fear or to try to hit a forecast number for their shareholders, right? And then we're inflating something time and time again. So I'll give you an example of this. And I'm not going to use names because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I think I've told you a little bit about this in the past. But about a month ago, I am at a networking event with other small business owners. It's a networking event I go to regularly. And there's two guys that are there that aren't normally there, okay? And they, between the two of them, own like 6 businesses, okay? And then they operate the businesses together. Very impressive, right? But we're talking about, hey, where are places where your margins have compressed? Where are places that you didn't anticipate that your margins have compressed in this past year? And some people are talking about fuel, and some people are talking about insurance and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, one of these two guys raises their hand and says, hey, we've got an idea. It'll solve all your problems. We'll just tell you what we did, right? Which is always dangerous. Like if you have a consultant who says, let me just tell you what we did and it'll solve all your problems, and they haven't come up with a custom solution for you, that's a problem because you don't need to do what everybody else did. But this guy comes out with it and he says, we just started adding, because all of their businesses are service-based, every single one of them, okay? And they play together well. So I can refer my other businesses off of this business. He says, we just added a 15% fuel surcharge to every single ticket. We started doing it a couple of years ago when, inflation really started going up, and we just added it. And he said, honestly, if people balk at it or they get upset about it, we just take it off. It's no big deal. We'll just take it off, and they feel like it's good customer service. But you'd be surprised. Most people, 90+% of people, never even ask. They just pay it, and they still feel like, hey, we were being honest because we gave them this price, and the fuel surcharge is just another part of that. But man, I got hot under the collar at that meeting trying to figure out, hey, how can I speak back into this without just totally being, a jerk about it? But if it's not costing you 15% for your fuel, which it's absolutely not, then don't put that down as a fuel surcharge, because it will help you short term, but in the long term, it's going to come back to bite you, because anybody with a brain is going to pay attention to that. And when they really start looking and saying, it doesn't cost you 15% of this bill as a fuel surcharge, right? So we got to be honest with people. And I think that's what it comes back to, whether you're for-profit, nonprofit, religious or not. At the end of the day, we're serving people and adding value to them. That is how we win. And if we're trying to win in any other way, it won't last for long, okay? And here's the thing, the longer it lasts, because there have been really big businesses who have lasted doing this for, a decade plus. But the longer you can make it last, when it comes to light, the harder the fall is going to be. And we have all seen those incredible falls in business wherein they're at the top of the industry one day and the next day they're not, because you can't hide mistreating the consumer. You can't hide mistreating people for long. And that's what's going on in the church world right now. There's a lot of scandals that are coming out. There's a lot of cover-ups, that are coming through. There's people who are no longer paying attention to their NDAs and saying, I'm going to talk about what happened anyway. Because again, you can only mistreat people for so long without that coming out. So regardless of what industry you're in and regardless of what sector you're in, for-profit or nonprofit, the best way we can win over time sustainably is to add value to people. And anytime we stop doing that or we start trying to add value to ourselves over people, we're going to get messed up. But what is it? I think it was Zig Ziglar that used to say, you can get anything you want if you help enough other people get what they want, right? And that's the goal. But the moment we lose sight of people, we're headed down a slippery path. And if you do it for too long, there's just no recovery.
When you started off that reflection, the first thing that came to mind was Simon Sinek's "Leaders Eat Last." You're talking about serving your people first, often to your own detriment. People don't think about that, and that you must be willing to, like, if the leadership is not about like I'm the man, I stand on top of the mountain. It's no, you're serving people. And that's what kept shining throughout the entire reflection. Are you putting the people that you say you care about? Are you putting them first? Are you taking their consideration into, or their concerns into consideration first? The money follows. And that's hard when you got to pay your bills and you got all that stuff. I think the other side of all of that, as you talked about the NDAs and all those other things, I'm curious to hear some more about that, because I think not enough people know about what's going on with that. The truth will come to light. People will do, in a specific example like that, people say, oh, I'm going to disregard the NDA, whether it's legal or not. There's a difference between what's legal and what is right. And those things will eventually come to light. And as you said, the longer it's been pushed under the rug, like you just getting a big old pile of dust and gunk under the rug. Eventually people look at it and go, what's going on here? And that's going to cause a problem.
Yep.
Aside from the obvious of like, because I can get away with it and because it makes me more money in the short term, like, what do you think's really going on there? Why is that happening?
Like with NDAs?
Just in general, why do people do that aside from I can make more money and I can get away with it? What is there anything you've noticed in just like the times that maybe you help somebody who's quote unquote recovering from that behavior? What do you typically find is there like an underlying consistent theme with that?
Yeah, but it's not what most people think. Like, this is going to throw people off, but it's usually comes back to people who are living with in a scarcity mindset. Like, that's how they're living. Like, their thought is there's not enough to go around. So whether it's the business that says there's not enough to go around, we got to grab all we can while we can, squeeze the little guys out, hold on until the next cash grab comes. Then we grab all we can while we can, because inflation and the economy and consumers going to be making choices and everything else. So again, we just got to grab all we can while we can. You've seen banks do it. We got to grab all we can while we can. Banks got huge margins there for a while. Now their margins are shrinking. Now with banks, it's a little different. They do it not just to grab what they can while they can. They grab it so that when the margins shrink and compress, they can still lend money and they're in a healthy spot, right? So there are good ways to do this, but when you think about it with businesses and with churches, it always comes back to when people are operating in this way, whether it's, hey, I'm raising my prices just to raise and get the money grab, right? Or it's let's hide the things that we're doing, kind of thing with NDAs and stuff like that, which businesses for a long time used NDAs, still do, but their usage has really tapered off in the last year because the National Labor Relations Board actually said, hey, these broad NDAs that say you can't ever say anything bad or potentially embarrassing about our company, those are illegal, right? But behind both of those, the reason why people do it is that there's not enough. I've got to protect the reputation of the organization. I got to protect my reputation. We got to grab all we can while we can, because there's not enough. And if people know the truth, we can't survive. And if this, that, and the other, because usually when you're protecting someone behind an NDA, you're protecting someone who's a moneymaker, for profit or nonprofit. You're protecting a moneymaker, and you're not sure that the brand or the church can survive without that moneymaker, or you're not sure they can survive if that moneymaker, took a hit. Versus, I think more businesses have done well when they've realized, we've fouled, we've messed up, when they call their own foul before the media does. Hey, we're just going to notice this. We made a mistake. We're doing everything we can to make it right. We've fired the people, who did this. It was against our values. Here's the steps that we're taking, right? When you do that, the media and cancel culture is a lot more forgiving than when someone else breaks it and you go, oh, I'm so sorry we got caught, right? So if you think about, I'll give an example of this. I can't even remember the guy's name, but he's a pastor out of North Carolina. This was in the news a couple of years or a couple of weeks ago. So if you just search on Google, North Carolina pastor, this stuff's going to come up. But basically, a video surfaced of him like 6 months before, maybe a little longer, talking at, I think it was at his church, but he said, "Hey, I'm going to say this and you're not going to like it, but I'm just going to tell you the truth, whether you like it or not." And he started talking about how women were dressing and how because women were wearing short shorts, and they weren't wearing pants or skirts or this, that, or the other, that they were just inviting bad actors. And he literally said this, right? He literally said, I used to tell people all the time, if I'm on a jury in a rape trial and I find out the woman dressed like that, that guy's going to go free because a man's a man. And when I heard that, my stomach turned. And I was like, no, that's not okay. You can't say that. A lot of people's stomach turned, right? So this comes out, but when you listen, that was said 6 months ago. And the church was eerily silent, but nobody called him on it. Nobody called him on it. And he just said, he literally doubled down on it and said, "Oh, y'all don't like that, do you? Well, it doesn't matter because I'm right." And you know it. And he moved on. So video leaks, it takes on national traction. People are calling for his removal. And now all of a sudden, he gives 2 attempts at an apology. Okay, you tell me how these work. First attempt at an apology, they put on their church sign, "We're sorry for anyone who is hurt," or something like that. It's like a half apology on the church sign. We were wrong. Then the second apology comes out as a written statement. Basically, I realized, I've done this wrong. I was wrong. I apologize, this, that, the other. What never happened was you never see the guy going before cameras where you can actually see his face and see, is there any actual contrition there? Okay. And if I want to apologize for something I'm not really sorry for, what am I going to do? I'm going to write a statement. Okay. And as businesses, so many times we're worried about, well, what if we say the wrong thing? Let's let the lawyers write it. No, let the lawyers look over what you're thinking about saying, but get in front of a freaking camera and show that you know what happened shouldn't have happened. Show that it bothers you because you're a decent human. And when you do, people are more likely to forgive. This guy, though, asking for forgiveness, and there's a lot of people calling for forgiveness, doing what I do in the spiritual abuse space. I'm just basically like, no, there's no reason to forgive him because he didn't own up to anything until he got caught. And then he apologized in 2 of the worst ways possible. And we have no actual sign of contrition, nor do we have a sign that anybody in his church is going to hold him accountable. So people like that, they need to be out of the church. People like that need to be out of business, right? So even our apologies become about how can we protect what we have instead of owning up to people were mistreated. People were hurt, right? That this is not okay what I said. This is not okay what I did. So that apology is all about how can we protect this and keep the church from folding under the scrutiny? How can we keep this pastor, in his position instead of having to let him go and find another pastor? And honestly, man, if he had just come out and been like, been tearful and said, "You know what? I think in old ways and that wasn't right. And I've heard from some of you about how much that hurt you. And I've heard some of the stories of women who have been through, who have been raped and that it wasn't your fault. And I'm just so sorry. I'm sick that I said that. I'm sick that I thought that way." Well, then I would probably be one of the people going, "Hey, we need more of that. We need more of that." So no, I don't agree with what you said. You need higher accountability, but we need to forgive this guy. Instead, on the other side, the way he did it, I'm like, we don't need to forgive this guy. And people like that don't need to be in the church. So it all comes back to when I'm looking at it, for profit, nonprofit, doesn't matter. We take from people when we think there's not enough to go around, scarcity mindset. And then we won't own up to our mistakes. We won't really apologize. We won't be real humans because we think scarcity mindset, I've got to keep everything I can. So I got to grab everything I can while I can. Then I got to keep and protect everything I can while I can. Versus if you have an abundance mindset, it's, hey, there's going to be enough to go around. There's going to be enough to go around. People still have needs. So even with inflation and everything else, if we keep giving value, let's figure out, is there a way for us to give any extra value without raising prices? If we just keep giving value, people are going to be okay. And if when we raise prices, we're transparent about why we raise prices, people are going to go along with that. Let's just keep adding value. There's enough to go around. Same thing with churches. Let's just keep adding value. There's enough to go around. And when we make mistakes, hey, we got to add value. And this breaks our heart because it didn't add value. It's inconsistent with our values. So when someone takes value from people in our organization instead of adding value to people, they're no longer a part of our organization. And we will immediately apologize. We will tell you before it gets found out, hey, this happened. This shouldn't have happened. This person's been fired. I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, when has authenticity not been a lightning bolt for positive change ever? I mean, that's the key. And I think what you're speaking to there is the ownership and the personal accountability. We talked a little about that when I was on your podcast. It's like when you take ownership, we talked about taking ownership of your faith and your spiritual connection. Same thing here. Apologizing and asking for forgiveness, far be it for me to say, I think is quite a spiritual act, and it requires a lot of humility, and it requires a lot of introspection, and it requires a lot of depth, and that is authenticity. And when you, of your own volition, go seeking that through that introspection, through that deeper conversation, go figure, and as my thumbs up goes with it, my Apple update, whatever thing, go figure that lands and resonates with people. People are willing, I think if a lot of people are willing to forgive, I think a lot of people will be surprised how willing people are to forgive if it comes in place of truth and honesty. People can tell. People can tell. Like, it is what it is. Like, people don't want to hear that, but people can tell. And you can grow from that. And if anything, it might be what allows you to become better. But if you just keep burying it, it's only going to make the path back that much more painful and that much more drawn out. You're going to have to come to that humbling revelation at some point. So you might as well get it out of the way early on and do the self audit than waiting for some other thing.
That's right. Well, there's all kinds of old wives' tales and stuff. Some are probably true, some of them aren't. But about different animals being able to, sense fear, smell fear. Dogs, bees, all that sort of stuff, right? But I think it's true in cancel culture. And there's so much I don't like about cancel culture. I don't think we should ever cancel a person because of what they did. Although that they may need to go to prison. That doesn't necessarily mean we cancel them. But I think when we cancel someone, it's because of the reaction to what they did. Right. And I think that's so much the danger. So culture can smell when there's more than what meets the eye. There's more than what is being said. Right. So we can smell and sense when you're hiding something when the dam starts to break. So I talk to so many business and church leaders that are scared of being canceled. And I always tell them, you don't have to worry about being canceled if you don't have a fear of being canceled. Know who you are. Know what your values are, live out to those values. And if people try to cancel you because of your values, you're never going to be canceled to the people who share your values, right? When we get canceled is when we're scared of being canceled. So we have people come, against us all the time, like with Church Disrupted and what we're doing on the podcast. I have somebody new trying to cancel me on social media all the time. I just don't care, right? We are going to stick by what we say. We're going to apologize if we screw up, right? If we're giving you information or whatnot, but we don't care if people in the establishment try to cancel us. We're not cancelable, right? We're speaking truth in a place where truth needs to be spoken. So because of that, there's no fear of being canceled. So it go back to that scarcity mindset thing. If I'm afraid of what I could lose, then people can cancel me easily. But if I believe there's enough, and I believe that even if I lose, I've gained already, you can't cancel me. Right. And that is so much the difference. It's why different sides, like I don't want to get into politics and stuff like that, but it's why different groups are more easily canceled than others. And some of them, not in great ways. They're just belligerent about it. They're like, no, I'm not going to be canceled. Screw you, move on, but again, it works. It's our fear of people. It's our fear of not having enough. It's all rooted in fear that comes back to that being canceled. But also if you think about this, Caleb, people are so worried about being canceled. If I make a mistake and I just come out and say I made the mistake before you knew I made the mistake, then you look like a total douchebag if you try to cancel me. Like I was honest. I came out and said I did this and I fixed it, right? So actually, you look more cancelable than I do if you come after me there. But if I wait on somebody else to break it, then I look like I was hiding something. Why? Because I probably was hiding something, So it's just one of those things, man, across culture, but especially in religious environments, we just got to get back to calling our own fouls. Like when you're playing pickup basketball with a bunch of other adult dudes, if you and I are playing basketball, we're over where you live, we're playing on a local court. Nobody is going to be like, "Oh, you fouled me." Okay, nobody wants to play with that guy, right? So you could take my head off, and I'm not going to say you fouled me, right? I'm waiting on you to call your own foul. But if you don't call your own foul, I'm not going to play with you a ton more, right? So we got to get back to that in culture. Like, hey, when we mess up, we're going to mess up. Just call your own foul, right? And that's why with the nonprofit that we're building, we're trying to call our own foul before the fouls exist, right? So we have open books from day one. So any donor who gives to us whatsoever can request fully open cash accounting books at any time. There's no magic. There's no look over here. There's no any of that. It's no, you can look at this. And when it gets too big and it needs to go to an accrual accounting system, we're going to have multiple audits a year and open books. And the audits are going to be when it goes to accrual, it's just because you can hide stuff in an accrual accounting system, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to do open books from the very beginning. We're not paying salaries from the very beginning. We're only paying for work rendered. So people can actually go through and request and say, hey, you paid this company for X, Y, and Z. So like, I've got companies that do some of the stuff that we do. So yeah, my companies are going to get paid. But you can go back and look at the invoice and see exactly what we did and where it fell within the other ranges of estimates that we got. So you're going to see anybody that we're paying that we're getting a really good price. And what we did pay them was we only paid them for this work done. We're not paying individuals. We're not paying salaries. We're not doing any of that because we know so many of the fouls of nonprofits are around finances. We're just, again, if a foul's committed, you're going to see it before we see it. And we're putting it out there. So if you see it, you can tell us about it. And there's all kinds of other checks and balances, but that's kind of where we're going and trying to set the example of just saying, hey, and we know that businesses can't always have open books and shouldn't, but nonprofits and churches can. But there's always things that we can do to say, how can we be more honest than other people in our industry? And how can we add more value? If we add more value to people and we're more honest, we are going to win all the time.
Plus, winning is such a relative term anyway. Like, that's something where in this common culture of with corporations with, what do they call it? This infinite growth model to the moon. I think what's enough? And that's where this crazy, like, I'm just going to push the margins because I'm just going to push the margins. Or what's enough? What do you need? Like, and not everybody wants to be the most, like, the Goliath of all the things. Knowing what you want and what you stand for allows you to facilitate that kind of change much better. But if you don't really know who you are, what you stand for, everything you just said is really at the whim of what you talked about, the scarcity-based approach, because you will only look at money as a scarce entity. You will only look at prospective clients as a scarce entity, and you will have to have as many of them, all of them now, forever and ever.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate
if winning is
saying.
getting all the money, if winning is getting all the money in the cash grab, it's becoming the Goliath, then we should have a scarcity mindset. If that's what winning is, because most of us can't do it, right? You talked about, you said, it's this to the moon ideology that we're just going to grow infinite growth models. People are talking about that all the time, right? Every business leader is wanting to find a way. How can I start a business? What can I do for this infinite growth model? Did you know the only thing that exists with an infinite growth model in nature?
What's
Cancer.
That? Oh,
Cancer wins. It will grow and grow and grow until there's no more growth to be had. That's when cancer wins. What do we do to fight cancer? We literally put poison in our own bodies, hoping that it'll kill the cancer before it kills us, right? But in business, one of the things that is said in business and nonprofits, it's said all the time. This is supposed to be solid gold leadership advice, and it's bullcrap. Healthy things grow. Healthy things do grow, but unhealthy things also grow. And cancer grows better than anything. Cancer is an infinite growth model. So when we're after the infinite growth model, we are creating cancers in our societies, right? What we've got to decide is before you get into business, there has to be a win beyond money, and there has to be a win with money of how much money is enough. That doesn't mean that we stop when we get there. But if we said, hey, if we said winning was at, winning was at $40 million a year in revenue, right? And that was when we started. That's what winning was. That's what we wanted. Then should we pursue, like, if we just keep growing naturally, that's okay. But should we pursue now 150 million in revenue just because we need a new milestone? Because what I've seen with a lot of business leaders, they do that. They don't understand the complexity that comes with that scale. And because of the complexity that comes with that scale, they end up getting to 150 million in revenue. And guess what? They come home with less. Because there's less margins, there's less there, there's a lot more headache, and nobody's making more in your company. You're definitely not making more, but you just got this thing you can hold up and go, yeah, I'll lead a $150 million a year company. When you were actually happier and in a better place when you were leading a $40 million a year company. Just right now with my companies, we can make a ton more money, but I want to be at every track meet. I want to be at every football game. I want to be super dad right now. So because of that, like literally, man, winning for me, anything above 80 grand a year that comes back to my pockets, I'll need it. My wife makes good money. I can always make more money. I can never get this time back. But what I do want to be is that, man, I want to be at the gym at, 4:30 with my middle schooler every day. I want to be at the events. I want to do all that. So when we define winning, okay, I think we're in a better off place than if we say, well, winning is just as much as I can get, because as much as you can get can never happen unless it's at the expense of other people you're taking from. And when we start taking from other people, we become a cancer to society.
There's a lot of mic dropness in that. And the other thing you brought up there, and I think is worth people understanding, is that if that's your singular goal, if that's your singular identity, you will create an environment to serve that. And much like you said, when let's think about cancer, most people never really want to look at the lifestyle of the human being and the ecosystem and the environment in which it was cultivated. Maybe they were smoking or drinking too much or whatever, name the thing. Because more is better. All the things is better. Accumulate is all better. Different than what you said there. You define winning differently, and it sounds like the ecosystem is much different. Go figure. You set up the ecosystem to serve the actual goals that you say you care about. But if you don't know what you care about, and it is really just some hollow thing, not to think, yeah, cool, it is cool to make money. But if it's at the expense of all the things you say you really care about, that's the classic. We always think about that CEO who climbed the corporate ladder and all the things, and they have the midlife crisis because they lost their family and they went dead broke afterwards and they got really sick. And then, of course, it was only a matter of time. And you couldn't buy your way out of that because you destroyed the connections and the people that you said you cared about along the way to get there. So I think that what you said was so important. Like the cancer analogy is quite profound. And there's a humility behind having you said, this is what I care about. Not what somebody else next to you might say they need double that. Fine, do you, bro? But knowing like, this is what I care about, and winning is my family and me being there connected. I've yet to meet a single person at the end of life who goes, yeah, I really cared about all the money I had in my bank account. It's always, wow, something relationship based every time.
Yeah. And man, I always ask that question with my clients, like, hey, what is winning to you? And there's a reason for that. I've got clients who, man, their businesses make mine look tiny, right? I want to help them, right? So if you want to scale and you want to build $100 million business and you want to sell that, at a 5 times multiplier, well, then I want to help you get there, right? But that's not me. And what it also does, it gives me the freedom to say, I don't have to take every person who says I want to work with you. Because I can stay busy, but that's not actually helpful to my goals either, right? It's not helpful to my goals of being able to, hey, when I saw a problem in the church, we were able to start a podcast and start a nonprofit on a dime because I had enough money to do it, to at least get it rolling, right? And then 2, had the time. And the time was the biggest issue. There will be donors who will help us raise the money, but we had to have time. So it's taken 10 months of just giving time to this. Well, if I was stressed the max, I wouldn't have been able to do that, right? And if you think about the infinite growth model, sadly, one of the greatest places where we see the infinite growth model in place is in the modern day megachurch. It's if we can get enough volunteers and we can get a system that works. So think about like this multi-site, multi-campus, we all look the same franchise model church. Well, if our production's good enough, if our speaker's good enough, we're piping in that famous pastor, on video. Well, then all we got to do is if we have enough money and we have enough volunteers, then we can keep growing and keep growing. And actually, we need less money as we go, right, per person to reach them. So we end up, we take business ideas and we assign a number value, to every seat. How many dollars is that worth? And again, not every church does this, not every multi-site mega church does this, but this is what we see a lot. We'll assign that dollar amount and then we'll build systems to constantly get us more volunteers and staff. And how can we find the best potential staff members from within our church? And how can we find more people to volunteer? And when people come to our church, the win becomes if we can get them, quote unquote, fully engaged, which means can we get them through a membership class, which is really an assimilation system that gets them to how quickly after they come, can we get them to commit to give regularly and serve regularly? Because if they'll give and serve regularly and we keep having people who do that, it's infinite growth. It's infinite growth. And we'll look back at it like, because there is a bit of an infinite growth model in scripture of as long as we had people to disciple people, the kingdom will always grow. I disciple you and you disciple 3 others and they disciple 3 others, right? That's a sustainable infinite growth, but it happens over generations, right? What we've done a lot of times in churches is we get so focused on the infinite growth model that we leave behind the, discipling one another over generations, knowing that each local expression of the church is like the body of Christ and each body has a life cycle, right? There's a growing phase, there's a sustaining phase, there's a maturing phase, there's a death phase. We forget about all that. And then it becomes less about discipling, teaching, and loving people over time and the kingdom growing infinitely. And it becomes more about how can we get people plugged in to use them so that this local expression of the church can grow infinitely. And the moment we move from discipling them and adding value to them for the kingdom to grow, and we make that trade from how can we get you plugged in and use your gifts and use your time, treasure, talent, all that sort of thing, so that we can grow, right? Then again, it becomes a cancer because cancer is taking the cells you already have instead of feeding your body to feed itself, right? So I think that's where we mess up because every church is going to go through a growth phase, but every local church is also going to go through a death phase. But that's okay because the body of Christ transcends generations. The body of Christ is about the kingdom. It's about, transcending beyond, this local space and time. So good things, we can take good things. Just an example, if you can take something really good you believe, and if you twist it just a little bit selfishly, it becomes cancerous, right? So that's why we've always got to have eyes. I think the number one thing we can do as leaders in any industry is to have eyes on people and adding value to people. And again, if you add enough value to people, there's going to be more than enough money coming your way to do what you need to do. So, hey, we want to make more money. How can we add more value to more people? That's the model.
But it's so simple. It seems too simple. Simple does not mean easy. I think that's the important thing that comes out of something like that. Like it takes time, patience, effort, depth to be able to do that. So
it's easier to raise our prices while removing 5% of what's in the bag. Right? That's easy, not sustainable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. I actually didn't know that. That was what was happening. That infinite growth model was in the mega churches. That's not all, as you said, but like that is what is. It makes sense as soon as you said it. Like, oh, well, I can wrap my head around that. I can see why that happens that way, which is the irony of the situation. Because what is this thing supposed to be serving? It's so powerful to see, especially. You got to be careful with this. The spiritual leadership. You're playing with people's You're playing with them. The most like salvation, essentially. That is a privilege to hold space for people. That needs
Yes.
to be respected. That is not something to just wield that power willy nilly. And classic, with great power comes great responsibility. So it's so interesting to hear that. There's plenty of people, they find 1,000 ways to rationalize why they're doing it. But if they really slow down, you ask them a couple of questions, like you said, like, what's really winning? And you really made them answer that question like 3 times in a row. What would the truth say? Are you really living in alignment? I don't know. And that's, whew, man, my brain just went. That was really
And
powerful.
when you think about churches too, man, like I always try to be careful. Like I'm not crapping on the church. I love the church. Okay. My life wouldn't be what it is without the church. Most churches are not subscribing to that infinite growth model. Most churches are not abusive in any way, right? But at the same time, let's take over, I would say probably more often than not, the modern day megachurch in some way subscribes to that infinite growth model, even if they didn't do it on purpose. And what it does is it causes issues, right? So if you got 9% or less of churches in the United States are 400 people or above, okay, 400 people or more. The average church is about 75 to 85. Okay, now that's the average. So keep in mind, that's counting the Lakewoods and the Life churches and Church of the Highlands, right? So if the average is 75 to 85, you got a lot of churches that are just small communities of like 50 and less people, right? You got most churches never break the 200 barrier. The majority of churches are never going to break that 200 barrier. So if I've got most churches are small, but 9% are 400 and above, okay? Would it surprise you to know that over 50% of American Christians attend those 9% of churches that are 400 and above?
Oh.
So most churches are not this way, right? But most American Christians are choosing and attending churches that are built on systems that are this way or lead this way. So it's why we've got to know the right questions to ask. It's why we've got to know red flags to look for to make sure that things don't get out of hand in the churches that we're a part of. Because again, they will look really, really good until they don't. So teaching people how to be curious and ask questions when they're checking at churches is a big part of what we're doing. And then working with churches that want to be healthy to bring in third party, people like us to do assessments, to do, what we call church safe certifications, to do independent investigations, and just to basically say, hey, if there's anything going on, we're going to be open books about it because we want to serve our communities. So again, it's just, we got to ask those questions though, because otherwise what you have people saying is, and we'll have a lot of people say this to us, they'll say, they're talking about, only 9% of churches are above 400. And it's probably only about 3% of churches that are these mega churches that you're talking about. And yes, that is true. But the amount of people it's affecting who are American Christians is totally different. And you don't have to be a mega church, which is 2,000 and above, to be running mega church systems, because a lot of those churches 400 and above are running mega church systems because they want to grow like the mega church. But I'll give you an example of this. The mega church system, it leads to things like this, which starts out with, I think, really good hearts. This is why we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't say the mega church is bad. We say, hey, there are systems here that we need to keep watch on. Right? There's things we need to do to hold accountability and to be careful. I was at a church, that top 100 church, all that sort of deal. A lot of good things happened at that church. But that church changed their mission a couple of years ago. Literally changed their mission. Okay.
Yeah.
Their mission was about people experiencing the love of Christ. Right? That's a people first mission. Okay. They changed their mission to reaching 1% of their state. 1% of their state is a huge number. There's one church. Their whole mission is they believe God put them there to reach 1% of their state. And actually their mission says starting, with 1% of their state, right? So when you put a number into the mission like that, well, now we got to get people. We got to grow. We got to grow. And growing with people in seats is not the same as serving people and helping them experience the love of God or a relationship with God, right? So we just have to be careful because those models, even in our missions, can become about growth. Now, I want churches to reach a lot of people because I think when we actually look at the values that Christ taught, man, we'd be a better world if we lived out those values. Unfortunately, a lot of churches aren't living out those values and they become more enamored with growth, more enamored with their bottom line than those values. And even more unfortunately, there's a lot of churches that have chosen only one political side of those values to live out. When the truth is, if you're living out Christian values, you will not be comfortable being a Republican or a Democrat or anything that is labeled here because Jesus had a different set of values. Yet when we really look at the values that Jesus espoused, I'll be honest, man, I talked to a whole lot of people about those values. And if they haven't done a lot of Bible reading recently, they'll call that a woke Jesus. And I'll say it's not a woke Jesus, that's who Jesus was. And if he was running for office today, a lot of people would call him woke and not vote for him. A lot of people would call him too conservative and not vote for him. Very few American Christians would vote for Jesus if he ran for office today. Because he's not what we expect. But at the same time, wasn't it the Pharisees and the Jews at the time that expected a political leader, a king, to be the Messiah? And Jesus was not what they expected. So it's just a good reminder for us. You know, we got to remember what our values are. It's what you talk about so often. What are our values? And if you're a Christian, what are the values that the Bible teaches? Not what are the values that my church teaches? What are the values that my political party teaches? What are the values that I like that Jesus taught? When we actually go back to values, values will keep a lot of these systems that hurt people from actually popping up and staying around.
I just love listening to you talk, brother. I'm just like, I got so much just flowing in my head right now. Just that everything, especially there at the end, when people get really honest about how they really want to show up, what his values mean. And you just dispelled like, hey, that's not about labels here, guys. And the irony of like, it would be both too woke and too conservative at the same time. Would you like, isn't that the point that you can see both sides? You can walk the line because the line is the line. You can understand and see both sides. Would you even recognize, it's classic, like, would you recognize Jesus if you walked among you? Would you know? And like that,
Yeah.
so many people I would say, probably not, because they attach, it had to be this way, it had to look that way, it had to be this thing, had to look a certain way for there to be depth and connection or truth behind that. Because what we're really looking for is, I want to be right about this, as opposed to, let me listen, let me understand, let me serve. It's not the case with so many people, because it's that the scarcity stuff you brought up, that it keeps coming back. Oh, I'm not enough. There's not enough. What if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
Man.
We got too many people today in all arenas of life, Caleb, who are more interested in drawing lines than walking lines. And Jesus set a line that we walk. When I set values in a company, when I create a new company, again, I've just created this nonprofit, we've set values. The moment that I set those values and the board votes on those values, that is a line, okay? It is a line that is drawn one time, and from now on until this organization ceases to exist, this is the line we walk. I don't get to draw a new line every time I don't like the value that I set, and I've written 2 books and that were just mine. And I tell people all the time, my middle school son will often quote my books back to me. And he doesn't quote my books back to me because he cares about what I have to say. I'm not impressive to him in that regard. He quotes my books back to me often to win arguments, because I'll be doing something that's inconsistent with my own values and he'll call me on it. And there's nothing I can do but go, you got me, especially when he starts out with, a wise man once wrote in a book that I read, and then he'll quote me. Right. So, but it's one of those things of, again, if I'm drawing lines, I'm like, well, that doesn't mean that right here. If I'm walking a line, then I have to actually submit humbly to my middle school son, even though he's being tongue in cheek, and go, you know what, that is inconsistent with my values. Right. So we need more of us who will say, and again, it's what you teach so well. What are my core values? What are my company's core values? What is winning? What are my core values? And then we walk that line until we lived out those values so well they're not hard anymore. And until we've actually won, we've achieved that goal. And then we can go back and say, what does the next goal need to be? And do we need to tweak our values so that they're pulling us up? They're a little difficult. They're pulling us up. They're pulling us forward instead of leaving us where we're at. But again, man, most companies are going to, they would have the opportunity to do that maybe 2-3 times in a full generation.
Yeah.
We get mad because we don't like the values we said we wanted to live by. They're too hard. So we draw a new line, right? We need to walk the lines that are already set, walk the lines of the values we already have instead of trying to draw new lines every day.
I want to lean into that, leave it a little more. I have a lot of people who come to me when they start describing why they don't feel confident anymore. And we get through the conversation, it inevitably comes down to, yeah, you said you drew a line in the sand and you kept getting pushed beyond that. And then you did it again. And then you did it again. And you kept, as you said, you kept drawing a new line because you weren't willing to hold the standard the first time. And usually in the beginning, it's fairly benign. And that's what you were saying before. In the beginning, it's hard because it is so benign. You're holding a standard because it is what is right, not because it's easy. And eventually, again, what we talked about before, the lifestyle you create, whether it's the people that surround you, the living space you put yourself in, the schools you put, like all the stuff, the environment only encourages the upholding of those values. Your son could literally say, here in your book, I think it's hilarious. A wise man once said, I got to imagine like, they're like, proud of you, but that really stuck. But when you're giving that power over to say like, here's what I believe in, here's what I stand for here, I think that that's authenticity. That's altruistic leadership, because you're saying, I'm giving you the tools essentially to take me down, to hold the mirror up. That takes
It's
guts.
not taking me down. It's holding me accountable. I'm giving you the tools. You say this is your language. I'm just going to speak it back to you because that's what a good coach does, right? I tell people all the time, that's what a great coach is just going to be like, hey, what would you tell somebody else, in this situation? But no, those values give other people permission, no matter who they are, whether they're a peer or below you, because most people would consider their middle school child as beneath them, right? No. Everybody gets to know my values who's around me and I care about. And that means everyone who knows my values gets to act as a mirror at any time. I can't get mad at the mirror. Okay. So I used to get mad at people when they'd call me on stuff like that until I realized all they're doing is holding up a mirror. And I've never once got mad with the mirror. I get mad with the reflection in it. And the person who's holding up the mirror is not who I'm mad at. I'm mad at what they just showed me in my own reflection. Right. So like with the Spiritual Abuse Institute, SAI, the values that we're going to vote on at our first board meeting, we got 6 of them. We embrace uncomfortable conversations. We ask tough questions. We practice radical honesty. We are solutions oriented. We set the example, and we demand accountability from the church. Okay. All of those are both inward and outward facing, right? Setting the example is going to be incredibly difficult. Because anytime we find ourselves doing something we don't want to see in the church, we have to stop and regroup, right? When we demand accountability from the church, we're not just talking about the organization, we're talking about the body, which we are a part of, which means we demand accountability from ourselves, and it's okay for you to demand accountability for us, right? We ask tough questions. That means we've got to let the trolls online ask tough questions, right? When we talk about embracing, practicing radical honesty, asking tough questions, embracing uncomfortable conversations, demanding accountability. Recently had someone who did a reaction video. So we had, a 30-second video. They did a 30-minute reaction video to it and why it was terrible and, why we're the worst and, why we should not do this, why we should not be calling churches out and everything else. I watched it. I didn't respond, right? There's no need to respond. I still don't agree with their assertion, but I can't get mad because it's out there, because we need accountability. People are free to push back. We don't have to agree, but they're free to push back, and we're going to leave that out there, and we're not angry about it, right? That's what it is. So those values, man, they are a mirror, and the mirror does not lie. There are no skinny mirrors in accountability. The mirror doesn't lie. It's going to tell you exactly what is there. And if you get mad when someone holds up the mirror of accountability, you're not mad at that person. You're mad at the reflection in the mirror. You're mad that you're not living out your values. And I have to go through it all the time. But if we will allow people who see us, whether we feel like they're our peer above us or not, to actually call us on that, then we're going to be better. And if we're not willing to allow our families to call us on our values, then we're always going to miss something, because your family will see the most real, raw, and worst parts of you, right? So if they can hold you accountable, then what happens is you become the best version of you. And I've said this for decades now. I want the people who are closest to me, my wife and my kids, I want the people who are closest to me to respect me most, right? That is hard. That is difficult. But I would say at this point in my life, the people who are closest to me actually do respect me most. It's not strangers online who like what we're doing and how we're fighting for honesty and transparency in the church or anything like that. No, it's my kids who sometimes are really, really upset with me as a dad, but they still respect me most. It's my wife. So if the people who know us most closely see us aligning with our values and being willing to let people hold up that mirror, you wind up at your deathbed a different place, bro. Like, again, what is the quintessential kind of way we look at it is on your deathbed. People are like, oh man, I wish these relationships had been better. I wish I'd had a better relationship with my family. I wish I'd taken more time for vacations, all that sort of stuff. I've never heard of someone being at their deathbed and going, you know what my regret is? My family, they respected me a whole lot, but not enough strangers did. Not enough people online respected me, right? We were just not going to get there. So if we let people hold up that mirror, and they're never going to hold up a mirror for you of accountability if you don't first give them that mirror. Hey, when I tell you what my values are, when I just told you on this podcast what our values were as a nonprofit organization, I just handed you and every listener a mirror. Not for you. I handed you a mirror, and I gave you permission to hold up that mirror at any stinking time. Right? That's hard. That's why we don't like to talk about our values. That's why we don't like to talk about what they mean. When I'm working with business leaders and we're working on their values, I'll say, hey, don't just come up with what you think is going to sound good on the wall. Because once you put this on the wall, your lowest level employee will have the ability to call you out as the CEO and business owner and correct you in front of everybody. Because they can't correct you on anything. But if you're not living out the values are bigger than all of us, which means anybody can correct anybody on the values, right? So make sure you're willing to be corrected on this, because there's going to be a cashier who's making $12 an hour who's going to call you on something, and you're going to have to eat it.
It's the ultimate equalizer. And I think what you brought out there too, especially deathbed stuff, regret is a powerful thing. And the mirror that you're talking about here with values, while it might be a short-term sting, you actually feel a lot better about yourself the entire time, because you walk in alignment. You go figure, the success you said you cared about at the inception of that path, of that endeavor, you preserve that, that creative spark. I know you feel it the same way, but like anybody who's got that creative genius and you have that this is what I want to do. There's no, it's such a body high to feel that. If you don't get clear with those values and you don't give out the mirrors, as you're saying, you're going to dim that spark really fast, and you will regret at the end of days that you just felt like, I 75% of it, I 80% of it. That's a different kind of regret. That's a different kind of pain. And not to mention, you're living with that pain and then that resentment and regret every day. Like, how much of that you want to regret 80% of your life or 20% of your life? That's not a small chunk. If you didn't get paid 20% of the check you were owed, you'd be pretty upset every single day.
Yeah.
That's one way to look at it.
Especially when you think a third of our life healthily is spent asleep. So If you're regretting 80%, you're regretting some into the time you're supposed to be sleeping. Like, so it's one of those things too, man. Like you think about this. Who do you think is the least informed person position wise in most organizations? For profit, nonprofit, it can be huge business, small business, doesn't matter. Who's the least informed person?
I would ironically I'd say the CEO,
It's the
person at the
CEO.
top. Yeah.
It's the CEO, because the moment you start hiring employees, nobody wants to give the CEO bad news. If the CEO doesn't request truth, nobody wants to give the CEO bad news. So every bit of data you think you're getting is skewed. Every single bit of it, right? So if we focus on mission, this is the difference between mission and values. Mission is awesome. Mission is that creative spark. Mission is why organizations start. Man, we got a mission statement. We're ready to go. Let's accomplish this mission. Mission is the creative spark. That's what we're going to do. Values is how we're going to do it, how we want to get there, right? So if we get there, but we don't get there the right way, let's go full circle back to my haunting conversation with a professional therapist about, my leadership. If you get to the top of the mountain and you plant the flag of success, but no one's with you, did you really succeed? Well, my values would say no. Mission wise, yes. If I plant the flag of success, I accomplish the mission. But values wise, people are woven in every personal and organizational value that I'll ever espouse. And if they're not, I'm not going to be a part of that organization, right? So what that means is no. If I get to the top of that mountain and I'm by myself, I didn't win. More than that, Caleb, if I get to the top of that mountain and I'm the first one to get there and plant the flag of success, I didn't win. Because the people I brought with me, I should be saying, hey, go ahead and get up there. Who wants to plant the flag? I should be one of the last people to get up there and still have plenty of success, because everybody's going to know they're up there because I lived out my calling. They're up there because I empowered them. They're up there because I invited them on the journey, right? I don't have to be the one to plant the flag, which is why if we could ever figure out how to do the podcast where my face wasn't on it, I'd be fine with that. It's why we invite so many voices onto the podcast and do the roundtable discussions, because my favorite part is when people are like either saying, oh man, that was incredible. What that person just said was incredible. And it's not me. I also like it when they're yelling at somebody and it's not me too. And then I can just take up for them as if it is me, like I'm not saying that just because I don't want to get yelled at. Like I like taking up for them, so like when I'm answering on social media, I always try to answer as we from the Church Disrupted account. We, and my favorites is when I'm taking it up for people. And then whoever's getting trashed will actually come on there and they're like, holy cow, you just pinned 1,000 comments in the last week taking up for me. It didn't even tell me I need to take up for myself. And I'm like, no, because I got you. Right? So yeah, our mission, your mission is going to tell you what winning looks like. Okay. Your values are going to tell you how you get to winning in a way that's worth winning. We got to have both.
I just love hanging out with you. Like, this brings me so much joy just to hear this kind of stuff. And I hope more people take this kind of stuff to heart. I'm taking a look at the time, and I want to make sure we have our fun little segment here at the end, because I don't want to keep you out of that fun little cycle here at the end. Let's do the quick questions. There are 3 questions, and I'm actually really curious how this is going to play out, because I'll explain the deeper stuff underneath it. Question 1, and it's 1 and 1A. What sports did you play when you were younger, and how did you play them? Like, were you the captain? Did you play all position of the field, or were you the quarterback? That kind of idea.
Okay. So when I was young, I didn't play a ton of sports, just because my parents didn't take me to do a ton of things like when I was in elementary school and stuff. But when I got into middle school, I did 2 things really: played football, ran track, and then in high school, I traded track for cross country. So football is where I spent most of my time. And football, I was kind of just a Swiss Army knife, man. Like I was never the best. But I always found a place on the field. So like I remember, on offense, I played for the football savvy people. I played every position except for tackle on offense and defense. So I played, defensive end, linebacker, safety, corner. Like I'd play them at some point or another, right? And over the years, I would have a year where I was a running back, and the next year I was a center, literally. And junior year I was the smallest starting center in the state, simply because my coaches came and said, "Hey, we need somebody to do this. Can you fill this role?" So I've just always kind of been a Swiss Army knife. And then in cross country, I was good enough to get a college scholarship, but I ran in a better place on my college team than I ran in my high school team because they were that good. So yeah, I was just kind of middle of the pack, man, middle of the pack, but I always wanted to be the hardest worker. Didn't have a runner's body, but I just had the mentality. So for me, that's kind of always been how it's been. I didn't need leadership in those positions. I just wanted to do what I could do to help my team win.
So here's why I asked that question. In college, I went to SUNY Cortland. It was all about PE and that kind of stuff. But I took this class on play, and I dismissed it early on. But when we examine how we play when we are younger, it often gives clues on how we do things in general. So when I heard their Swiss Army knife on the football field, brought me right to leadership, knowing and understanding enough about all the positions. That way you can communicate the language, which speaks to all the listening that you do. And then I heard it with cross country, which I thought was really interesting. Like the two one is short, intense, quick, team. Of all the team sports, it is team.
Yeah.
They all have to function together. Every play. Cross country is an endurance. So you brought up sustainable leadership. Those two things shine very obviously. Go figure. You haven't not kept doing that as you've gone on. You've just been able to understand the roles. If you look at got 3 different types of companies going on, but all serving long-term, same vision, values, always espousing them. So that was a really cool response. That was really like that.
Awesome.
I really like that. Question number 2, desert island movie and show. So you're stranded on desert island. You have one movie and one show for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Sheesh, man, I don't spend enough time watching movies these days. Let me see. For a movie, I'm going to have to pick something that makes me laugh. So I'm just trying to think about what that would be. That was a harder one. I can tell you for the show, it would be Heroes. Only ran for 3 seasons, and it only had one really good season, but I would watch that season till the day I died. If I'm by myself, if I'm with anybody else, it's friends, because we can watch that together, and enjoy it. So that would be the caveat. I don't know if I'm by myself or not. And then for a movie, gosh, man, I don't know. I'm going to break the rules here. If I'm by myself, I'm going to trade it for a book. Yeah, if I'm by myself, I'm going to say, can I take the Harry Potter series instead? To be entertained, or can I take the Bible instead to be, spurred on in my spirit? And if I'm with someone else, I honestly, if it's me and my wife on a desert island, I'm going to say, what movie do you want to watch? Because I want her to be happy, because if she's happy, and I'm with her, then we can be happy stranded on a desert island. And if she's not, because I picked a bad movie, then the movie's not worth it.
That's the most unique response to that question I have gotten yet. I have not had anybody pivot that way and split it and say, well, it depends if I'm with somebody. So it's interesting to me how I thought about how you would enjoy entertainment. I'm curious. I didn't really watch Heroes, but I always think about the classic hero storyline is we have these special gifts and these powers and these types of things. How are we using them? It's a clash between good and evil. How do we, and Heroes, I believe it was there was teams together. So, again, I still keep seeing these similar themes. It's about how are you connecting? What are the things you want to connect to along the way? I always find that entertainment and what we connect to entertainment wise, and your initial statement around comedy, if it's a movie, it's got to be a comedy. You got to laugh. We got to enjoy the journey together. But I liked your pivot around it being relationship based as a way you were going to find that kind of levity. So I really like that. Final question. What is your deathbed meal and who are you sharing it with?
My deathbed meal. Yeah. My deathbed meal is going to be high quality hibachi like
Oh,
a filet mignon hibachi meal, and do I get to share it with just one person? Like, how many people are at the table?
however you want to take it.
Okay. I mean, if I've got the ability, I want my wife and my 2 boys to be there, right? It's just, around that hibachi table and enjoying stories and each other.
I love that. Well, you know this, and we've talked a little bit about who's holding your hand on your deathbed. So go figure. The way you just talked about who you give your holding up the mirror to and what you've talked about wanting to be the respect within the family. But I think respect is more like I've exemplified what I said I cared about. I think
Yeah.
that's so powerful because on our deathbeds, if that's our mirror, like we really show them that type of mirror both ways as well. And I think that that's really beautiful. Reason why I asked that question, I fundamentally believe world peace can be solved one family dinner at a time. So
Yep.
continue to stay in alignment with that.
Which go figure, we still have family dinner around the same table multiple nights a week, which has been very hard to keep. But that was like the one thing my
Wow.
wife said when we got married. She never had family dinners and she wanted us to prioritize family dinners. So like with 2 teenagers and crazy life and in a culture that doesn't do that, we still have family dinner at least 3 nights a week.
I was just going to say that. That is almost like a foregone like art in and of itself. Family dinners, like maybe once a month, everybody gets together, but that's not a thing. Wow. The other side I wanted to share with you, like when I was younger, talk about relationships, my father and I, that was our thing of how we connected. We would go on boys' night. We didn't see each other. Didn't hang with him often. He was always at work, but he made it a point. We would go to the sports authority. I don't know if they had it near you, but they had sports authority. We'd go look at sports stuff. We would go catch a movie and we have a bite to eat together. And that was our path to having this connection. So that was my way of kind of bringing you into like my way of feeling love and connection and different journeys of how I've come to all this stuff. So I really appreciate like that second one, especially too, like a couple of ways you answered that. I should have guessed you were going to bring an awesome like twist to the way you were going to reflect upon it.
I just felt like I was breaking the rules of the question. So
I loved it.
Mad.
Oh, have you met me? I mean, we're entrepreneurs at heart, brother. We were born to break rules or bend them at least because to be stuck in the rules is too much. Let's do this. If somebody's been listening and they're like, I need more Jeff in my life, what would be the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, if they want to do it on the business side or professionally or just have a conversation about any of that sort of stuff, just go to jeffcochran.online. And if you can link it in the show notes, some people can't spell the last name, but jeffcochran.online. And then my email is jeff@jeffcochran.online, not because I'm a narcissist, but because it was just easier to remember and brand. And then if they want to follow along with any of the Church Disrupted stuff or find out about more about how to support the Spiritual Abuse Institute when we launch that publicly, they can just go to church_disrupted on Instagram. And you're going to see plenty of stuff there. And then you can link there from kind of to everything else we do and all the content. But yeah, man, any listener, if I can serve you, help you in any way, I'd love to have that conversation. And I think we've got a way on the website for you to do a discovery call for free. Doesn't even have to be about business. If you just want to connect, if there's something we've said that, has resonated with you, you want to ask more questions about it, feel free to go ahead and do that. It's not going to bother me at all if it's not business related.
I hope everybody takes him up on just doing that because since I've met you, like you fundamentally like helped elevate my life. I feel like a better person. I feel like I have such a great friend. I can't wait to actually like see you in person and give you a hug. Like this has been such a great relationship in my life, especially in the past few years, like this weird evolution of where we've all been. It's been just really a pleasure to getting to know you, my friend. And I really hope other people connect with that. And I was on the podcast and we had a blast doing your podcast as well.
Yeah,
so
it was a fun episode.
Yes, it was. Closing thoughts, my friend. What final words of wisdom would you like to share with our audience before we head out today?
Man, it's simple. It's all about people. Life, business, it really doesn't matter. Anything that you're going to put your mind and heart to that matters is all about people. So it's just love and serve people well. And if we do, everything else is going to fall into place.
So, I mean, that was a perfect summary on the show in and of itself today. So that was fantastic. Jeff, right before you, brother, everybody listening, like go check it out. Go check out the podcast. Go connect. I think especially the SAI initiative, that's going to be really powerful as somebody who knows, experienced a thing or two about that kind of stuff. I think bringing that type of enrichment and enlightenment and support. I think that we, as we talked about when I was on yours, we talked a lot about like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just give it some frameworks to get better. And so people can have better spiritual experiences and come to better connections with the people we just talked about, with those relationships. So I really love what you're doing with all those things, and everybody, I hope you go connect, and all that stuff will be in the show notes. So thank you again, my friend, and everybody listening. Until next time, I remind you to love everybody.